Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Glenn Mills. It is time to go inside Utah politics. We do begin this morning with Derek Monson with the Sutherland Institute, here to discuss a new report on families. Derek, welcome to the show. Glad to have you with us.
Glad to be here, Glenn. Thank you.
This is a really interesting report. It's titled The Utah Family Miracle, 5 Policy Ideas to Keep Utah Families Strong and Stable. Talk about some background first before we dig into some of the findings. Why was this report done? What's the purpose?
Well, we wanted to look into how Utah's families are doing, and specifically connections between how Utah's families are doing and the health and well-being of our economy, because we think there are deep connections there, and this report establishes some of those basic facts and relationships between families and economic outcomes.
How was the report put together? How did it all come together?
Well, a researcher from the University of Virginia and a visiting scholar at Sutherland Institute by the name of Brad Wilcox has been working in family policy and family data for more than 20 years. He put together all of this information, looking at different types of surveys, and had a couple colleagues help him out, and examined how those trends are looking in Utah compared to other Mountain West states and to the nation.
You talk about, when you say the need to do this, the connection between families and the economy. What do you find? What is that connection?
Well, it just turns out that there is a strong relationship between the health of families in a community and the economic outcomes, things like the jobless rates or the job creation or economic growth, and the proportion, say, of married intact families in a community. And this has not just been found in our report. If you look at research coming out of Stanford, found something very similar of economic mobility, one of the strongest predictors being what kind of community did you grow up in, and how many married households were there in that community. So it finds those connections and then looks at Utah's, as they call it, the economic miracle compared to what we're calling the family miracle, and sees the good, right, that we're doing really well right now, and then some of the storm clouds on the horizon, that these indicators of family formation, things like what age people get married, when they have kids and how many kids do they have, those things are kind of on the decline right now. And so it says that we're doing well, but there's some things we need to give some attention to, and so that the well-being that we've enjoyed can be the same thing for our kids, our grandkids, the economic success.
You bring up the childbearing rates and marriage rates on the decline right now. Talk about why that is.
Well, there's a lot of factors, really. You know, there's a lot of cost increases for young families nowadays. So having a child is less affordable than it used to be. There's a lot of kind of pushes to put off marriage for things like economic well-being. You know, you should wait to get married until you're firmly established in your career, and so that has led a number of young people to get married at later ages. There are kind of a lot of cultural factors, kind of what I'm getting at, and those combined with the economic factors lead to some of these outcomes. But there's things that we can do to help turn that around, and that was also part of this report, is trying to propose solutions.
We'll get into that in just a second. I'm curious about this marriage and childbearing rate thing, though, because every generation, you know, they take a look at what their parents bought their house for and what the cost of living was, and every generation kind of takes a look at it, and it can seem overwhelming. So why do you think now we're starting to see this generation say, I may need to put this off before I can be, you know, more firmly established?
Yeah, that is a great question, and there's a lot of research going on around that. And I don't think we have all the definitive answers, but I do think we have some of these significant pressures that is at least common sense level, and some of the research backing up, again, kind of an emphasis on these economic outcomes before I establish my family. Whereas in the past, it was almost reverse. You know, you got married when you were young, maybe when you were in college, and then together you built your economic future. And we've kind of reversed that in a lot of younger generations. And so that's, I think, a significant part of it.
Okay, let's dig into some of the other findings from this report, some of the key ones. One is that Utah leads the nation in the rate of children living in married, coupled households. 82% was the number in the state of Utah, 75% across the nation. First, talk about what that means.
Well, that means that in Utah, families, kids in families are getting that, for the most part, that foundation of a married family, the stability that provides, the economic benefits that provides, because there is economic correlations between whether you're married and what income level you end up falling in. So a lot of kids in Utah are getting the benefits of that. And that's one reason why Utah is one of the more economic mobile states in the United States. You know, as a child growing up, you can surpass where your parents were on the economic ladder.
Another interesting figure out of Utah County, 9 in 10 children being raised in a married coupled household. How does that rank compared to other states in the country?
Yeah, Utah County is leading the nation, really, in the number of kids that are being raised in two-parent families. And it's an outlier. It makes sense, you know, when you think of the cultural dynamics going on in the state of Utah, but it is a very high performer.
Okay. So overall, how would you summarize what this report says about the state of Utah when it comes to the rest of the country?
Well, I think it means Utah is doing well. Utah is not just economically, but maybe based in some of these family factors, doing well economically. And so there's a lot to be proud of if we're living in Utah, a lot to be happy about, right, for ourselves and for our kids. And it also says that there are things we need to give some attention to. Again, those declining factors that might mean if they continue, and that's a dynamic, by the way, that a lot of states are facing. Utah's not unique in that regard, but it is something that if we simply ignore, that the future might not be what it is today.
Okay. Obviously, when you take a report like this, you've already alluded to the fact that you want to take a look at what the data tells you and try to improve upon it. So what are some of the top recommendations that this report indicates could help the situation here in our state?
Yeah, we give a handful. First, what we measure in public policy and society is what matters to us. So we think we need to start measuring at a deeper level how family structure is correlated with various social outcomes, you know, economic outcomes, health outcomes, education outcomes. So as we say, look at graduation rates and break those down by race, economic status, and those factors, we also ought to be breaking it down by family structure to recognize those connections and be able to make public policy that is grounded in those realities. A second one is...
Real quick before going to that second one, if we could.
Yes.
How do you do that?
Well, so there are a lot of information gathering mechanisms out there, surveys that we base a lot of the state data reports on, you know, whether it comes to things like child obesity or graduation rates, like I said earlier, child poverty, those kinds of factors. And so we can, in some cases, may need to add a question to surveys saying, you know, what's your family status? And in other cases, that data is actually there. It's just not showing up when we report. So they're pulling it from sources where they've asked those questions, but we're not breaking it down by family structure. So we just need to start doing that.
Okay. You were starting to get into the cost of living concerns.
Yeah. So again, you know, with things like inflation, everybody's feeling this. Things are more expensive, and that has led to a dynamic where you have families, young families in particular, who say they want to have a certain number of children, but maybe they're not having those kids, the number of kids, because of the economic concerns. So we think we can take economic measures through, say, tax policies and economic policies that could lower the cost of living for families and allow them to kind of fulfill their wishes and their aspirations when it comes to their own family.
So the idea then is to take this to the state legislature and lobby or push for a policy change.
That's right. And there's some of that already going on. In this last session, they pushed for a child care tax credit. So building on those efforts, we have an earned income tax credit that's targeted to a certain population, maybe building on that policy to help encourage in marriage and family formation rather than penalize it based on how it's structured. And so those kinds of reforms.
All right, Derek Monson with the Sutherland Institute. Appreciate your time. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Still to come, we're going to stick with family